Good morning. We're going to get started. My name is Kimberly Eds. I'm the Public Information Officer for the District Attorney's Office. Just a couple of ground rules. Obviously, this is a little bit of a different situation than we normally host press conferences. So we have a call-in line. Reporters are on our moderated call-in line, and then we also have reporters and cameras present here in the law library. We will have 4 speakers, starting off with Fullerton Police Chief Bob Dunn, then Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer, Orange County District Attorney Bureau of Investigations Chief Paul Walters, and Anaheim Police Chief George Cisneros. In the audience today joining us in support of this operation is Orange County Assistant Sheriff Jeff Halleck, Buena Park Police Chief Corey Sainez, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Assistant Special Agent in Charge Stephen Galloway, ATF Resident Agent in Charge Paul D'Angelo, Special Agent Ryan Stearman. From the DA's office, joining us is Chief Assistant District Attorney Sean Nelson, Assistant Chief of the Bureau of Investigations Ron Seaman, Senior Assistant District Attorney Raheem Beitai, Assistant District Attorney Chris Duff, who is the head of our Special Prosecutions, who oversaw this prosecution, and Deputy District Attorney Tara Meath of Special Prosecutions. Following the speakers, we will open up for questions. If you are here in attendance and would like to ask a question, please come to this standalone microphone, and we will alternate with calls on our moderated line. Okay. I'd like to introduce now Fullerton Police Chief Bob Dunn.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'll take a brief moment to tell you how we all got to this point in the investigation. In December 2019, the Fullerton Police Department noticed a rise in residential burglaries throughout our town. After extensive research, Fullerton detectives identified similarities in a number of those burglaries, most notably the use of a high-performance Dodge Durango SRT SUV. Additionally, several burglaries occurred in the same area, and some were even committed while people were at home. The loss of the property totaled more than $1.9 million to include money, jewelry, and a half dozen firearms. After conducting numerous hours of surveillance and writing over 30 search warrants, our directed enforcement team was able to identify 5 suspects. Also, we know that criminals commit crimes without respect for our city boundaries and our jurisdictions. So during the course of the investigation, Fullerton detectives were in contact with other police departments about our burglary trend. As a result, detectives from Anaheim PD, Buena Park PD, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and the Irvine PD identified burglaries in which they believed that the same suspects were responsible, the common thread being the Dodge Durango. In addition, at least 2 residential burglaries were confirmed to have occurred in the city of Chino Hills, which is an area that is serviced by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. During the course of this investigation, law enforcement attempted to intercept the Dodge Durango on 2 separate occasions. Both times, a pursuit ensued, and the suspects drove with wanton disregard for public safety. Because of their disrespect for the lives of others, we were unable to continue those pursuits. However, last Friday, law enforcement did catch up with these suspects in a tactical operation conducted by SWAT teams from North County SWAT, which is a conglomerate of Fullerton, Brea, La Habra, La Palma, and Placentia, Anaheim, Buena Park, Orange County Sheriff's Department, the Riverside Sheriff's Department, and 2 special response teams from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. All 5 suspects were taken into custody without incident. Search, arrest, and arrest warrants were served simultaneously at 7 separate locations. And as a result of the operation, 2 additional people were taken into custody for unrelated crimes. One for weapons, narcotics, and stolen property violations, and the other for stolen property violations. Copious amounts of evidence were collected, and some of that evidence has led us to additional confirmed burglaries in both Los Angeles County and San Bernardino County. These suspects are no strangers to the criminal justice system, and our district attorney will elaborate on their criminal history. What is clear here, though, is that they were prolific burglars who perpetrated crimes across at least 3 counties and operated without care for the consequences. Well, at least for now, their victimization of our communities has come to an end. This case underscores law enforcement's resolve to effectively collaborate across jurisdictions to bring criminals to justice. But our work here has really just begun. Now we focus on joining our partners to successfully prosecute these repeat offenders. And with that, I will turn it over to our district attorney.
So good morning. Thank you so much, Chief Dunn. I really appreciate it. You cannot believe the leadership of the Fullerton Police Department. It goes without saying, Fullerton has experienced some really tough times over the last few years. But with Chief Dunn's leadership and all the men and women that I've met in the Fullerton Police Department, I am just absolutely convinced that it's one of the most stellar departments and it has a great future ahead of it. There's a gentleman here, Detective Jones of the Fullerton Police Department, who I had the honor of reviewing his materials, the search warrants, before they were executed and signed by a magistrate. And consistent with my comments to Chief Dunn, I just want to say that I know a lot of individuals were involved in putting together this case, multi-departments and obviously other officers and personnel in the Fullerton Police Department, but the work that was done for purposes of building a probable cause declaration and putting this evidence together was some of the best I've seen in 30-year career in law enforcement. The reason you see so many law enforcement officers here from different departments today, as well as so many of the command staff, as well as members of the district attorney's office, is not only because of the phenomenal work that brought this case together, multi-jurisdiction, but because of the great concern that we all have based upon this particular case. This case is not a one-off about 5 individuals who are now in custody on no bail holds, who engaged in extensive criminal activity. This case is a microcosm of what is happening across the state of California as a result of different legislative and state initiative measures that have really watered down and diminished the seriousness of theft-related crimes in California. I'm going to go through and talk about the backgrounds of these individuals, and you're going to see what I mean. So I'm going to start with Sergio Soto. He is a third striker. He has been convicted of 2 residential burglaries and assault with a deadly weapon. He already had a no bail warrant for his arrest at the time that he was taken into custody. He spent 2 years in state prison in 2007 for assault with a deadly weapon and 16 months in state prison for a stolen vehicle. We know for sure, because of the work of the Public Policy Institute of California, that auto theft has gone up exponentially as a result of AB 109. We know that property crimes are going through the roof because of AB 109, Prop 47, and Prop 57. Let me get next to Eric Soria. He is a high-risk parolee at large who is currently on parole for residential burglary. He is on California parole for a 459 residential burglary. He is considered a high-risk parolee until Friday's arrest. He's a convicted felon. He has a strike for a 2015, let you guess it, residential burglary. And he was sentenced to 4 years in state prison for residential burglary. Alvaro Ramos, he is also on parole for residential burglary and for evading police. You heard Chief Dunn talk about the fact that the Durango there had been other attempts to make a car stop on that Durango because of suspicious activity related to other residential burglaries and suspicious activity in our neighborhoods here in Orange County. That Durango got up to speeds of over 150 miles an hour and was able to evade law enforcement for a felony car stop at that time. Alvaro Ramos is on California, strike that. Let me talk about next Eugene Yee. Eugene Yee has 1 strike conviction in 2005 for serious bodily injury, which is a serious and violent felony. And then Herendir Pinati, he has no prior prison sentences. As Chief Dunn indicated, these individuals came down into our county and other contiguous counties, San Bernardino, for example, to sneak through our backyards and break into our homes in order to steal designer purses and shoes and jewelry, cash and guns. And I'm very pleased to say, although we can't show you the photos, that significant amounts of property was recovered, and now we're going through the process of tying those to burglaries that occurred in our charge complaint. On 4 of those occasions, on 4 of the charge counts, people were home. We call that a hot burglary. The reason this is such a serious crime is because if somebody is home, it's obviously an incredibly dangerous situation. If people are not home, but they were to, say, for example, come home when the intruders were in their house, that is an incredibly dangerous situation. In this particular case, as a result of a window smash and the suspects concurring or corroborating people were home, they decided to flee the particular location. Thank goodness. Because of the criminal history of these individuals, they are residential, many of them are residential burglars. And thank goodness their background doesn't show that they're home invasion robbers. But that is clearly what we're trying to protect against, is the dangerousness of people who would go into residential properties. 44 burglaries. I want you to really dwell on that, right? Solving and leading to 44 burglaries. Over the weekend, I think it was on Friday, we asked for no bail warrants. Now, under what I've been criticizing as these emergency orders during the pandemic, these individuals would have been eligible for bail, or in some cases, zero bail. But because of the outstanding work of Brahim Beytai, Chris Duff, and Tara Meath, we were able to secure no bail warrants for all 5 individuals. When they come into court for their arraignment, we're going to be there to argue against any reduction in bail. We have seen that during this pandemic, that individuals who have harmed our community have secured reductions in bail because of the pandemic. Orange County Jail is open for business. Sheriff Barnes, and I want to thank Jeff Halleck for being here. They have done a phenomenal job in managing our jail population so that we can continue to do business and not release dangerous individuals like the 5 individuals who are now charged here in Orange County. So let me give you their exposure. Defendant Yee is looking at 19 years and 8 months in state prison. Soto is looking at, because he's a third striker, 35 years to life. Pinati is also looking at substantial time, 55 years and 4 months. So Ria is facing 83 years and 8 months. And Ramos is looking at 125 years. The natural question for everybody is, how did this happen? Why and how do career criminals keep getting out of state prison? That's a very difficult question to answer. There are many actors today in our criminal justice system who frustrate me. I don't speak for all the men and women here today in law enforcement, but it has to frustrate them as well. If these individuals, if we prove these 44 burglaries in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt, these individuals should face those substantial periods in state prison. The public has an absolute right to be protected against these career thieves. And we are all in danger when individuals like that are allowed to be on our streets. And it's got to stop. One of the things I did very soon after becoming the district attorney, I was very concerned about the AB 109 and local parolee population. Those are the parolees that, under a change in state law, AB 109, are monitored by local parole and not by state parole agents. So we formed an AB 109 and parolee task force, and it's overseen by the chief of our bureau, Paul Walters, who, as many of you know, has 30 plus years in law enforcement. Outstanding career in law enforcement. And our goal from inside the DA's office was to work with every law enforcement agency in Orange County and target and watch those individuals who have been to state prison at the local level. Because as Assistant Sheriff Halleck knows, and John Barnes knows, and all of us in this room know, our local jail has become a state prison. And that is why the early release of prisoners from our jail has been so offensive to me. Now, I do need to make the point that this case is not based upon early release as a result of the pandemic. That these individuals are not related to that particular circumstance. But the AB 109 task force has 5 district attorney investigators, 1 Santa Ana police officer, 1 county probation officer, an investigative assistant, and a research analyst from the DA's office. And this task force is working, as evidenced by the partnership we have proven works today with the arrests and the charging of these 5 individuals. To date, the AB 109 task force has had 5,840 compliance checks on individuals who are under supervision for AB 109. They have revoked 71 convicted felons' supervision under post-release community supervision. That is phenomenal. So just to talk briefly about the AB 109 task force and why it is so important to protect the public is Chief Walters. And if he would come forward to make a few comments about its relevance, I would appreciate that. As he's coming forward, I want to make this last point. No, come on, Paul. No jurisdiction, just don't get within 6 feet. No jurisdiction should be forced to have this expenditure and deployment of resources. No jurisdiction should have to be faced with a population who is on parole from state prison under supervision and has absconded, and it's resulted in warrants for their arrest. No jurisdiction should be facing this level of public safety threat with, in this case, 44 burglaries being resolved. Of course, we will prove that in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt. That's got to stop. This expenditure of resources has got to stop. And it's only going to stop, not at this level, because we're going to keep arresting and prosecuting the bad guys. It has to stop at the state legislature level. Chief.
Good morning, everyone. As the DA mentioned, I'm Paul Walters. I'm Chief of the Bureau of Investigation for the District Attorney. First, I would like to thank DA Todd Spitzer for his vision to develop the task force. When he first was elected, he contacted me and said, I've got this idea. I want you to see what you can put together. It's been in existence about a year. As he mentioned some of the stats, I'll go over some of the others. We're extremely pleased at the effectiveness and particularly the cooperation that we've gotten from the Orange County Police Chiefs, the Sheriff, of course, and then the federal agencies have been great partners. Since July 2019, the task force identified 36 subjects who were supposed to be in Orange County under supervision. Instead, they had moved out of state. 7 so far have been extradited. We have 6 more that are pending arrest and extradition. The U.S. Marshals assisted us in arrests in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, and North Carolina, to give you a perspective. They're currently looking for 3 other suspects in Texas and in Arizona. One of the priorities for the task force was to identify the career criminals, as the district attorney mentioned. We all know from decades of firsthand experience that these career criminals will continue to commit crime after crime unless they're apprehended and brought to justice. In this case, since many of the crimes are committed in different jurisdictions, it took law enforcement working together to identify the crimes and the people that are responsible for it. So this is really an example of how law enforcement works in Orange County, all working together, both local, state, and federal, to solve and prevent crime, no matter what jurisdiction the crimes occur in. The DA mentioned the 44 burglaries. I want to give you a rundown. 16 of those occurred in Fullerton, 15 in Anaheim, 6 in Yorba Linda, which is Sheriff's jurisdiction, 2 in Chino Hills, which is San Bernardino Sheriff, 2 in Buena Park, and 2 in Irvine. And I think since this originally was written, there have been others that have been cases that have been identified, as Chief Dunn mentioned. I really want to give special thanks to Chief Bob Dunn and all the police chiefs and sheriff that allowed the DA's task force to work closely with their staff. Our special enforcement teams are really appreciative of the cooperation and support, especially Chief Valentine from Santa Ana PD, who allows us to be housed in his department. The primary mission, of course, of AB 109 Task Force is to collaborate, identify individuals, and bring them to justice as soon as possible. And this is a prime example of how working together, identifying the individuals, developing the cases, and bringing them to justice is so important to all of us to keep our community safe. I'd like to now introduce Anaheim Police Chief George Cisneros.
Well, thank you, Chief Walters, and good morning. I'm George Cisneros, the Chief of Police for the City of Anaheim. I have just a brief message for our personnel and community. Operations such as this would not be possible without cooperation amongst our agencies and communication between our personnel. To those involved in the investigation, thank you for your hard work and commitment to duty that led to the arrest of these 5 suspects. I know that these 5 men and women continue to do work as this is an ongoing investigation. This group of criminals were responsible for numerous burglaries that span several counties, and with their capture, our residents can feel safer in their homes and about the security of their property. This operation should also serve as a reminder to our citizens that even during these uncertain times, your law enforcement professionals will not rest, will not waver, and will continue to apprehend criminals who victimize our communities. As we continue to move toward a new normal, whatever that may look like, please realize that your police department has remained vigilant, furthering criminal investigations which are then entrusted to our prosecution partners. We are committed to serving our communities by keeping our citizens secure and introducing those who seek to harm you into our criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We'll now open it up for questions. The first question will be from our moderated phone line. Oh, there's no questions? Okay. In-person questions? Go ahead. Paul.
I was just wondering, did you have dates of when those pursuits happened, or when the burglaries started, when they stopped? What kind of
Do you want to answer that?
time ranges? Sure. Also kind of wondering about how the pandemic hindered your investigation. Right?
Sure. The first part of the question was rough dates when these started. In about early December of 2019, we noticed our trend, and I can get you specifics on when the actual dates of other burglaries, since we've tied them together to other cities. Their spree seemed to subside or slow down about the time that stay-at-home orders were issued, beginning of March-ish. That doesn't mean that we won't find others as we continue to investigate these individuals, but to the best of my knowledge, that's where that sits. I don't have the dates of the two pursuits, but I'm certain that some of the investigators in the room remember them, and I'll be happy to get them to you when we're done here. And as far as how the pandemic affected our ability to do our job, it really didn't. I mean, we live in an electronic age now. Most of our communication happens via electronically, especially with our partners. I think the hardest part for all of us was observing the proper amount of social distancing as we went to go take these suspects into custody. But it did not affect our ability to investigate this case one bit, and it won't going forward.
I have some dates for you, Paul. So there was a pursuit, there was a chase on February 25th, 2020 in the city of Fullerton. The Durango was observed in the city limits, and there was a high rate of speed, and that didn't result in a detention. And then on March 3rd of 2020, there were operations going on in Fullerton, Yorba Linda, and Anaheim Hills. A sergeant from the sheriff's department observed the Durango, and it fled at a high rate of speed before the sergeant could get in behind it. I want to just talk about the pandemic quickly. At one point during 150. 150. That was on March 3rd. I want to just talk about the pandemic because one of the arguments that the proponents of the emergency orders of the Judicial Council have been making is that the reason zero bail and no bail is working is because crime has gone down. Well, you heard Chief Dunn mention that while the investigation is still ongoing, with respect to the burglaries that we know about, there was a moratorium, if you will, on the activity that we know about, which makes perfect sense, not because these individuals were necessarily adhering to a stay-at-home order. It's because people were home. And we know that when people were home on 4 occasions, it spooked them and they fled. So we know that they don't like to go into occupied residences. But when people are home, you're less likely to be burglarized unless somebody specializes in home invasions. 2, your car is less likely to be burglarized because you're home and it's in your driveway. And your Amazon packages are less likely to be stolen because you're home, and as soon as you get the text that your package has arrived, you're pulling it off your porch. It's not sitting there all day. So this notion that these socially progressive reforms on early release are working, and the reduction in burglaries is evidence of that, is ludicrous, as evidenced by this exact case, because we know these are burglars. We know they break into people's homes, and we know that their activity appears to have declined during the pandemic, which means, at least it's reasonable to conclude, it's because people are home, and they don't like to go into homes when people are home. Okay, anything else?
Is it believed that these 5 individuals were involved in some way with all 44 burglaries, or is it believed they're part of a larger ring that there may be others who are involved?
So at this point in the investigation, these are the only 5 suspects that we were looking for related to this ring. That doesn't mean that as we continue to investigate it, we might find more people that might be associated with it, but the 5 primary suspects from this ring that we've identified are in jail.
Was there a pattern in the homes that were targeted, or were these random? Is there something you can talk about that?
Based on what we know about the case today, I would say that the pattern was random in nature. Clearly, they were willing to make the effort to drive from where their normal area of residence is in Los Angeles County to outlying counties to perpetrate these crimes. So we have not identified, other than their MO and how they did it, any pattern between the homes.
But let me just supplement what Chief Dunn said. They were looking for, and we collected certain kinds of property: high-end watches, high-end purses, money, in cases where they could find a safe, for example. So they were targeting higher-end neighborhoods where they believed there was a substantial likelihood it would result in finding and stealing loot that was consistent with the kinds of things they wanted to have. It's also consistent with what was recovered at some of the locations during the execution of the search warrants, where high-end purses, watches, and other high-end items that are lucrative and have value to dispose were secured. Paul.
That reminds me of another question I had for you was, you said that they found or that they've recovered a substantial amount of the stolen goods.
So let me correct that. I can infer that. So that is part of the ongoing investigation. There's a substantial amount of property that still needs to be tied to locations. But the property that was recovered Friday at the search warrant sites is consistent with the type of property that the victims indicated was stolen. There was also weapons recovered at the search warrant sites that have been confirmed as stolen from other robberies not charged here. What do we have? One? How many guns, of the guns, how many were from ours? One, right? So one of the weapons recovered, a gun, was a confirmed stolen from one of the burglaries here in Orange County. Was it Orange County or San Bernardino? Orange County.
So that made me wonder if they were sitting on more than they would normally, because it's difficult to fence or whatever during this stay-at-home orders.
Paul, that would be all speculation. I mean, we don't know any of that at this point. We don't know. I mean, I'm sure law enforcement knows, is it harder to dispose of property during a pandemic? Probably is. The other thing is, where's the market? You know? So that's just all kinds of speculation. The fact of the matter is, but even without the property that was recovered, although a lot of the evidence was phenomenal in terms of connecting the suspects to locations, we had search warrants signed before the execution of the warrants. So we had Detective Jones and others, phenomenal connection between how they pieced this case together and put evidence together to convince a magistrate to sign the warrants. So this is a phenomenally solid case. Like I said in my opening comment, I've reviewed a lot of search warrants in my time, and I was so impressed by the tools and the leads that they put together in this case. Phenomenal. Just great work.
And Paul, where I think your question was eventually going was, what do we do now? We have this property and evidence that we recovered. How are we going to connect it back to these burglaries? So our detectives, working with the detectives from the various agencies, will sit down, sift through all the reports we have related to these burglaries, and try to connect property that we've obtained to the victims. And our detectives will be in contact with victims. And again, we're still investigating other ones. So we don't want people to reach out to every detective that they filed a case with and start calling. We're going to call you, and our detectives are in the process of doing that right now. But eventually, we want to link it to the people that lost it.
We'll now take a call from our moderated call.
So I'm able to ask a question, is that how this works?
Hi, Vicky.
Forgive me, the audio is really poor on this end, but two questions. Are you crediting this AB 109 task force completely for these arrests?
That part of the question? So Vicky asked if we're crediting the AB 109 task force with the sole operation. The short answer is no, but they're certainly one of our partners, and they're certainly a group of people that has, through their work the last year, gotten to know the population that is out there, and our detectives would be remiss if they didn't include them in an investigation of this magnitude. And so we appreciate the partners at the DA's office and all the work they've done up to this point to give us an area where we can focus.
And Vicky Vargas, did you have a second question?
I realize there was a litany of the number of burglaries, property recovered. Within any of this, was there any physical violence, any of those kinds of charges that would be?
Vicky, no, not that we're aware of any violent acts. Now, that doesn't mean that we might not uncover some as we continue this investigation, but as charged today, no.
So, Vicky, this is Todd Spitzer. I appreciate those questions, but one of the things I do need to emphasize is what I said before. A residential burglary is inherently dangerous because you don't know who you're going to confront when you come to the residence. And so residential burglary is considered, obviously it has great exposure. It's a non-probation. I mean, it's presumptively a state prison case for that reason, although you can get probation under certain circumstances. So all I do is want to emphasize is the last thing any of us would ever want to have happen is somebody breaking our patio glass door. And, I'm not even sure we made this point. They all came in with gloves, ski masks, hoodies. They were all covered up. They were doing everything they could to cover up their identity. So even on video surveillance camera by homeowners, there was a lot of detective work that was necessary to connect these individuals to the premises, because traditional video from many of us who have cameras now was not as good as it could have been. And so other techniques had to be employed to connect these individuals to the property. So scary, scary, scary. No one wants to have anybody come to the rear patio of their property at all, especially masks, gloves, and trying to hide your identity.
Do you have any more questions? Okay. Well, we would like to thank all of our partner agencies in coming here and supporting this operation. We will be sending out a Dropbox link that will include the mug shots, the criminal histories, as well as the most updated complaint and any other pertinent information related to this case, and that will be coming to you shortly. Thank you.